Hi, welcome everyone. Nice to see you here. There's a lot of people coming in.
Hello.
So it's 1 minute to 6 and we can wait a couple of minutes. They're dropping in. Hello, good afternoon to you too, or good evening, or good morning, or whatever it is where you are. So it's 5:59. I can begin to say welcome everyone to this Agile 20 Reflect event that's co-hosted by us at Dandy People. And tonight we're going to listen to Natalija about OKRs at the center. So I think we can start and then I'll let everyone in. So Natalija, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Patrick. So yeah, welcome everyone from my side as well. Happy to be part of this wonderful Agile Reflect Festival in 2021, where I think we have more than ever the reason to look into different ways of Agile working, new concepts, new methods and tools, and how to apply them to our organizations to thrive in uncertainty and yeah, create organizations for the better. So what we want to focus on today is looking at OKRs and maybe a little more courageous approach to the OKR concept and how to then use it to develop your organization, but also at typical pitfalls that organizations face when looking into the OKR concept. And while people are still dropping in from the waiting room, I would love to just start by connecting each other because OKRs is one of the many Agile topics that I think really live from practical experience, from exchange in the community. So I will share the link to a mural board, and you see that here on the screen. So to have a little interaction with you throughout the meetup. And you find a big space here in the middle where you can just copy paste your LinkedIn credentials if you want to, meet fellow OKR participants or stay in touch after the event. And we also have a Q&A section here on frame number 6, where you can post your questions during the talk, and then we'll take them at the end for the Q&A session. So let me just give you the current link for that board, and then everyone will be able to just drop in. So here you find your LinkedIn credentials, and it's as easy as that. You just paste your LinkedIn URL here, and then Mural will create this wonderful little profile here. If that doesn't work for you, just use the chat functionality in Zoom, state maybe your name, your company, your city, your LinkedIn acronym, or whatever else you want to share to stay in touch with people. So, and I see a couple more folks are joining us, and let's just give them a minute as well.
Yeah, and I'll drop the link in the chat as well, again, for those that
yes, awesome, thank you. All right, I see first profiles coming in. Yeah, sometimes they make it a little hard to fit into the spaces, but I guess that works fine. So how do we go about this interesting topics of OKRs? I would assume that some of you already know some things around OKRs. Some of you are maybe rather new to the topic. So I will just kind of start in smoothly, easily to the topic by a little introduction, and then kind of talk about the first common pitfall that companies fall into when looking into OKRs. Then we will move into a little breakout group type of exercise where you can discuss with fellow OKR practitioners a couple questions, come back into the plenary, and then I will share some more input on common pitfalls before we then move into the Q&A, just so you have a little outlook of what's about to happen today. So as stated in the event description, this is an interactive session. So I would love for you to connect, to ask questions, to really get into the Q&A, to take the most out of the session then as well. And while I'm speaking, I see a couple more profiles coming in. And thanks, Patrick, for sharing the link to the mural board again. So for those of you who just joined, we're just in the connecting part. People are just dropping the LinkedIn profiles on the mural board. where we will interact and collaborate with each other. All right, and while you're still moving around there, I think I can just get started with my input. So, OKRs. And what OKRs at the center means and why a courageous approach to goal setting can maybe develop your organization and what is important for that. Let's start with the foundation. As you might know, the idea behind OKRs is rather simple. You just take the long-term goals of an organization, the purpose, the mission, the vision, or maybe the strategy, and then you have the daily execution. So the decisions that you need to undertake, the projects that you're doing on the way, hopefully towards your long-term goals. And what OKRs then simply do is they provide a concept to bridge the gap between these long-term goals and the daily tasks and decisions you need to make. And how do they do that? They do that by defining your goal in an inspiring description of the next step towards that purpose or vision in an objective. So that's the inspirational part, but they don't leave it at that, but they combine this objective with measurable key results. So something that looks at the objective from different perspectives and kind of answers the question whether you are on the right track towards achieving this objective in form of a relative or absolute value that measures a certain change, for example, in customer behavior. And you set these OKRs, so these objectives and key results, for a limited amount of time, regularly in terms of 3 months, for example. And once you've done that, you can go about achieving your goal. But how does that look like and work in practice? Let's take a simple example. A couple of years back, I used to live in the beautiful city of Hamburg for the North. Currently, I'm based in Munich. And one goal that I had from the beginning after moving there was to successfully finish the Hamburg Triathlon. For those of you who don't know that, it's part of the World Series. So it's a pretty big event with like 250,000 people attending. And so it's a really crazy event if you just kind of join there as a rookie, but that's totally possible. And when thinking about this long-term goal, of course, that's not something you will just do, tomorrow and will succeed. But you need to come up with a step-by-step approach towards achieving that goal. So how can that look like in terms of OKRs? Well, when I thought about joining the triathlon and got my tickets during the winter season, I thought about what would be the next important step now to undertake towards achieving this goal. And for me, that was to actually be in good shape before the intense prep training starts. So I signed up with a colleague of mine, and we said that for the last 3 months before the actual race, we would kind of be in an intense training plan for 6 days a week. But to do that, or to be able to do that, I really needed to be in good shape before even that starts. So that was kind of my objective for the 3 winter months. And now it was about kind of looking for key results to undermine it. So how would I know that I'm on a good way towards actually achieving this good shape that I wanted to have when spring hits? And so for me, that meant, for example, running 5K in under 35 minutes, or getting my heart rate down to a certain speed, or being able to do 60 sit-ups in 3 rows or less, and 1.5 kilometers of swimming without a break. So anything that would kind of look at this objective of being in good shape from my long-term goal, and then defining what it would mean to then come closer towards this goal. So something that I can then also measure over time in terms of the progress that I achieve. And then the next step, of course, is to think about, okay, what do I now actually need to do in terms of execution to be able towards achieving that objective? So for example, going on a swimming date with my colleague once a week every Wednesday to actually train for that, or look for a running partner, or buy new shoes or whatever. So the execution is not part of the key results, but it's actually the activities and initiatives that I then do in order to be able to achieving my objective. But OKRs don't really stop there. it's not just about setting goals in a different way with objectives and key results, but it's also about tracking progress and regularly adjusting. So kind of similar what you might already know from, for example, a Scrum cycle. So defining OKRs at the beginning, regularly checking in, for example, every week or every 2 weeks, and then reflecting back at the end of the cycle, how far did I get in order to achieve my goal, but also in a retrospective format in order to reflecting on the process of the OKRs. Did it actually help? Was my goal set too high or too low? How was the collaboration around the OKRs? What can we learn from that? And then also take to improve our next OKR cycle. So no wonder that many companies these days use the simple idea of OKRs because they think that will help thrive in uncertainty, will help them thrive in terms of their product goals and towards their customers. So OKRs is kind of something that has become pretty popular on their road to success. That was also the case for one of the customers that I worked with last year because I support companies on various stages of their OKR journey. So they set out to work with OKRs. I helped them in the beginning. And a couple months later, the picture kind of changed. They had high hopes for OKRs, but the feedback they really got from their employees was more, well, we do not really see any benefit. Nothing has really changed. And it's taken up way too much time. And unfortunately, this is often the case when companies start on their endeavor towards working with OKRs. And that's what we want to look at today. How can it be that OKRs that are built on a cyclical agile model and have a lot of potential to develop your organization can actually lead to that kind of employee and customer feedback? And so the question can be, are OKRs actually overrated? Is it something that is not maybe even something we should look into? And what I would like to argue for is today, really, from all the experience I gathered over the last year, I think OKRs are not overrated, but the problem is more they are underestimated in both their complexity and their kind of potential to develop your organization. So it's not just a simple idea rolled out across the organization, serving as the silver bullet towards all your challenges. It's a little more complex than that. So today we want to look at some common pitfalls towards mastering this probably simple idea that lies behind OKRs, some courageous decisions and good practices that have helped organizations to actually make use of this potential, and also how OKRs can serve as a catalyst for organizational development. And then, of course, your questions and things that you would like to know apart from that. So first things first, how do I look at OKRs? Maybe a little background just so you know why I present OKRs the way I do. So I'm an organizational development coach, as I said, with a focus area in OKRs, but I've been working in the field of transformation and change for many, many years, especially around the HR and leadership functions. So I look at OKR from the perspective of the whole organization rather than just being a simple agile tool, so to speak. And I've worked with many different customers and clients from small startups to big corporations, of course, all with a very unique OKR journey due to their unique setup and unique challenges. And so today I support companies either in their implementation phase or when they want to train OKR coaches, or also when they stumble upon the same challenges over and over again and want to redesign their OKR approach and see if they can kind of make it a better fit for their organization and its challenges. And apart from that, of course, many topics like leadership and responsibility, but also Agile HR come up in the process. So that's a kind of, the two other focus areas I'm dealing with that will probably also shape what you see in the talk around OKRs. But let's go back to my customers. So they set out in the beginning, taking the simple idea of OKR and wanted to implement that in their IT department. That was the idea. They had kind of like 150 people in different IT teams wanting to increase maybe the focus, the alignment, and said it would be a good idea to try OKRs, especially since the CTO already had some experience with it in a former company and it worked quite well for them. So what should go wrong, right? The problem was the feedback was not as positive as they thought it would be. And speaking with many of the employees when I got to working with that customer was that nobody actually really knew why they started working with OKRs. So whenever I would ask that question, why do OKRs exist in your company? What was the purpose of them? Nobody really could answer that question. And that is actually the most common pitfall that many companies fall into when starting with OKR, that there is actually no case. Just because Google does it or other companies do it doesn't necessarily make it a good use case for your company or an actual reason to start with an endeavor like OKRs. So clearly defining the why for your OKRs in terms of what problem are you trying to tackle with OKRs and what are you trying to achieve with OKRs is definitely the first important step. And that's where I would love to go into a first little interaction with you guys. And for that, we will split you into some little groups to discuss what is your why for OKRs, because probably you came here for the reason of looking into the concept more. Maybe you're also a practitioner or have customers who are practitioners. So what are the reasons behind your interest and your customers' interest into OKRs? And so for that, we will split you into breakouts. Patrick will do that in a second. And then you'll find a little pop-up window where you just click join the breakout room. And that will bring you to a virtual room similar to this one, where you can discuss for a couple minutes with your fellow participants. So kind of do a short introduction, your name, your company role, what brought you here maybe, and then discuss what is your reason for OKRs. You also find the task description in frame number 4, and you find a little space in frame number 5, and I'll just quickly show that to you on the mural board here, to just take some notes on Post-its in your little groups. So what are the reasons that you now gather in your discussion why your company or your customers' companies are interested in OKRs? What is the problem that they're really trying to tackle? All right, so that's the idea for the next, let's say, 12 minutes. Any questions I can help with before we get started? So far, so good. Then you should see a pop-up any second looking like this one here. So please click on join the breakout room. That will bring you to your little group room, and there you can discuss with your fellow participants what brought you here and what is your why for OKRs. Then have fun. I'll set the timer in the mural board and will automatically bring you back once that is done. So welcome back, first couple of you. You just still have 30 seconds to finish up the discussion. So welcome back, everyone. Just wait a couple seconds until everyone is back in the main room. And that's the time up sign for mural as well. All right, so here we are. Welcome back. So hope we didn't cut off too bad in your discussion. Probably needed a lot more time to get into topics, but as a first starter, we would love to, just hear a couple voices. What did you discuss in your groups? What are your reasons to look into OKRs? What kind of challenges are you trying to tackle with OKRs if you have some experience already? Who would like to share from your group?
Okay, I can go first. Sure. With all of your permission, of course. My name is Abby, so I was in a group number 11. Hi, Jatin, nice to see you. And I'm from Canada, Winnipeg. It's very cold over here, so I'm just working as a Scrum Master. But very recently, I've given some additional, responsibility to set up ACE, Agile Center of Excellence, and actually my question is and I'm just trying to explore the OKR, the objective and key results, and how we can best possibly, blend it with our epics features, and how we can see that it is giving us a best possible result. So I'm here just to, how we can link one of our group member, Gunnar and Maria and Pontus, we were just discussing about how best we can link it with our features, how we can utilize it, and how to get the best possible outcome by understanding the concept OKR and utilizing it in our day-to-day, product backlog, features, etc. Yeah, that's what our, discussion, the point of discussion. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for sharing. Can definitely dive into that also in the Q&A. How about the other groups? What do you want to achieve with OKRs? Where are you looking into it?
Hi.
Hey there.
Hiya. So yeah, I came across them by accident. I came across Measure What Matters, the book, and John Doe's book, which I read. And the company I work for, we still are rooted in traditions, so traditional performance management and HR, and quite often we get too many objectives all at once. So we already know we can't do everything we're being asked, and they are quite often subjective. So it's not actually, objective measurements where you can track progress and really see whether you've achieved what needs to be achieved. And also it's hard to see how you align with the higher strategic goals and how you're fitted in to help deliver that. So I'm really here personally to see what can I find out about OKRs, and could they be an alternative for us to consider, and how difficult are they to put in place?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks.
Any other perspective before we move on?
Hi. Go on, Jonathan. Johannes.
Thank you. Oh, okay, Johannes Lindmark, Agile coach working for Tele2 at the moment. We haven't implemented OKRs, but what I see, it could be the next step, because we like objectives, we like to measure things, and we want to track them. And also the OKR, I see it as a framework. When I studied it, it helps me sorting out how to define mission, vision, objectives and results, and sort things out to make it clear. And this gives a better picture, more clarity in purpose and why. So I would say it's to create clarity on what we're aiming for, which I'm after. And OKRs, I think it's a natural next step. We also run safe. We have PA objectives, which fits quite nicely into that concept.
Okay, thanks a lot. Sam, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, well, so I came because we're, my company, we're on our third quarter of implementing OKRs. And so I wanted to, and I read your book. Thank you. It was good. Just wanted to see how other people are doing. It's going quite well, I think. We're getting better and better. And then another guy in the group has been doing it for a couple of years. So it was good to chat about how it's going for everyone. And so I'm looking forward to the rest of this meetup.
So did you already see any benefits, any value add after the first couple cycles into your OKR journey?
Yes, definitely. This quarter's probably one of the best so far. We're doing the weekly check-ins, making sure that everyone does seem to have a much clearer focus on the tasks that need to be done to get to the key results that were prioritized. So it's helping us quite a lot.
Okay, thank you very much. Anything else, Chad? For now, then let's move on. So we just tackled the subject of a typical pitfall when you start working with OKRs, that nobody actually really knows why you start working with OKRs. And kind of the antidote to that is really defining the why for OKRs. But what does that actually mean, and why is that so important also to start off with that? Well, you can, of course, quote this famous quotation by Stephen Covey, but I think the message in here is really kind of distinct also for OKRs, that as long as you don't know why you're starting to work with OKRs, as much as you want, the why in your OKRs itself, it doesn't really give you the direction and what to look out for also in the OKR implementation. So really thinking about OKRs in terms of which problem do I really want to solve? And first, maybe have clarity around what are actually my current problems and challenges, and how do then maybe OKRs as a concept fit towards tackling these problems? And what do I then want to achieve with OKRs in the mid and long term? But also to have a really honest look around in your organization and look at, okay, so what's my starting point? For example, if I want to focus a lot more on value creation and creating outcomes, that's a typical thing for OKRs. Where do I stand right now? Are we like already pretty good at that and just want to, you know, improve it a little bit? Or is that like a really improvement area where we would say we're kind of 2 out of 10 and we want to get to an 8 because we see that as a necessity to be a successful business in the future? So to kind of get a feeling for, okay, how big is the step that we're trying to take here also with OKRs, and which kind of problem can OKRs maybe help us to achieve? That being said, as we all know, in a complex world as we work in today, OKRs might just be one piece of the puzzle, of course, to help us tackle this problem. But that even makes it more important to know, okay, which problem are we actually talking about, and how can we then use OKRs to tackle it? So the typical things why companies work with OKRs are kind of in line with what you just said. So it's often about autonomy, creating more alignment in your organization towards shared goals, kind of pointing out what is really the meaningful contribution of every team towards our shared goals, establishing something like faster learning cycles, but as I just pointed out, also the focus on value creation. And then of course, and that's why it's in light blue, unfortunately, I hear that quite often as an argument for OKRs. Well, it works quite well for Google, so let's do it because then we want to be successful. I always thought it would be more kind of a joke, but after talking to 2 potential customers where I heard exactly that phrase, I had to include it here. And that's, of course, something that we want to move away from in terms of it's a successful concept that we can copy, and more looking into the direction of, okay, what is our problem and where could maybe OKRs then help us solve this particular problem in our organization? And let's, of course, not forget focus and direction for the teams and the prioritization that you also mentioned. The first common pitfall that then companies fall into is taking the simple idea of OKRs and just starting somewhere. And don't get me wrong, I'm totally pro experimentation and starting small and just getting into practice mode. But what I mean here is really kind of creating the awareness that when you start working with OKRs, especially what you just also mentioned, coming from a rather traditional structure and maybe performance management system, and now trying to implement OKR, that's a massive change journey. And that's not something you can just, flip overnight in your teams. So really thinking about, okay, how can we support this kind of change journey that we're about to embark on? So what are we looking at here? We're looking at investing in training and preparation. And that doesn't mean you need to send off your employees for 6 months to really dive deep into all the aspects of the concept, but it's more about, okay, learning enough to answer the questions of what is different if we work with OKRs compared to what we do now. And what do we want to achieve with OKRs also for the company, but also for the teams that we're trying to implement it at? So make it as tangible as possible for the people that you're trying to address here, for example, in your pilot or in your first experimentation steps. And to also answer, so what do we need to get started? Is there any kind of structure, any kind of support that we need to set up before to make this also an endeavor worthwhile? The other aspect is to create designated roles and responsibilities. And when we look at, for example, Scrum as a framework, it has all these designated roles and responsibilities baked into it. And I believe that the same should be true for OKRs. We don't need people who do that full time, of course, because we're kind of thinking in 3-month cycles, but to look for people who know enough to support their teams in their change journey. And 2 roles I like to work with are an OKR coach on a team level. So really getting into the practices of the team, supporting the teams in the pilot phase, maybe facilitating OKR events, because it always helps, same as a Scrum Master, to have this neutral outside perspective and just a facilitator to guide you through the process, but who could also maybe do some coaching for valuable OKR definition, to not fall into the mode of just copy pasting activities in your key results, but looking for actual inspiring goal and valuable measurement criteria. And if you thinking about tackling OKRs on a bigger organizational or department level, it might also be wise to look into, okay, how can we maybe have a change agent or on an organizational level? Because looking at OKR from that point of view, it might be wise to have a person who oversees the implementation, but who also oversees, okay, how are people implementing that? What have been all the learnings in the team that we can gather centrally to then also iterate our OKR approach and to kind of sync this feedback from the OKR reviews and retrospectives, and also maybe provide some extra knowledge and support for the teams or the team of OKR coaches. And the third thing that should not be overlooked is really the individual change journey. And as you might have already experienced when you started working with OKRs, same is true for employees, but also for leaders. For many leaders at the beginning of implementing OKRs, it is a big change, kind of giving more autonomy to the teams, being more self-organized in terms of finding the solutions rather than just writing the solutions down in the OKRs, but also the way that you openly discuss goals, shared goals, maybe also tackle some challenges in the OKR process might be a big change for them. So also looking at, okay, what is the individual change journey like, and do we need anything to help out people here from a coaching or also a systems point of view? The third pitfall that I often see happening in organization is that the OKR approach does not fit your organization. And of course, OKRs have underlying principles and structure that might be the same in all the organizations. But on top of that are a ton of different details and variations that you need to pick from in order to make it work for your organization, your structure, and also your point in time of your development. So looking into designing your individual approach without sacrificing the underlying principles. So the idea is not to say, well, we've got a budget principle process for 12 months, so let's just do, OKRs once a year, then it's a better fit. That's not what I mean. But look into, okay, how can I kind of presume the principles, but still make decisions that kind of fit to my organization and towards the goal I'm trying to achieve. So I'm kind of looking at the way that you're doing OKRs as kind of, like in a color palette. So you've got the system basics. For example, how often do you do OKRs? Is it a 2, a 3, a 4 months cadence? What is covered in the OKRs in terms of content? Is it just product goals? Is it the overall organization? Is it just strategic topics or something else? The OKR set definition. So who is taking part in the goal definition? How mature are your objectives in terms of, for example, focus on outcomes, but then also the way that you tackle OKRs in the cycle process. So how often do you do check-ins? Who is involved here? What is the focus of your check-ins? And how do you do reflection and then incorporate your learnings afterwards? And within all these aspects lie all the kind of variables that you can design in your organization. So what I would like you to invite thinking about is experimenting also with different approaches in the beginning. So for example, try out 3 months and then look if that's a fit for your market and your organization. Or if maybe you work in a very fast-driven marketplace, maybe a 2-month cadence with some smaller OKR sets might be a better fit. I also know some companies that move then to 4 months OKRs because it's a better fit for them in their market. But just kind of use this experimentational approach also towards your OKR system. And one thing I would like to point out here is, as much as variations and experimentations are key, at the same time to have a transparent and concise approach of the most important things in your organization. So I'm a big fan of kind of defining the most important things, like, for example, the rhythm and the cadence and things like that centrally, and then give teams enough freedom to adapt OKRs to their needs, but to have a clear understanding, okay, what does OKR mean for us in our organizations? What do we mean when we talk about objectives and key results or initiatives and tasks, for example? So that's definitely a discussion worth having because it might bring some additional clarity around the concept, but also around your goals in general. And when we talk about OKR implementation, it's very easy to fall into the pitfall of setting up a 6-month project and plan the perfect rollout for your OKRs. So kind of using a waterfall traditional project management approach towards OKRs. And what I would like to argue for here is to use the principles of OKRs, of agile ways of working, as good as possible from the beginning when you're trying to make a shift towards that. So really using the OKR principles itself to implement OKRs. What can that look like? For example, to define OKRs for your OKR implementation. So think of your OKR implementation already in terms of what outcomes do you want to achieve? How would you measure over time that you've been successful towards achieving that goal and so on? But to also inspect and adapt the OKR system after every cycle. In so many companies, I see it happen that they set up an OKR system and then they roll it out and they just do it in the same way for the next 1 or 2 years without really iterating based on the learnings they had over time. And let me tell you, the learning curve normally in the first couple months and cycles is pretty steep when it comes to OKRs. So there should definitely be a need to inspect and adapt afterwards. One thing I cannot stress enough, especially when we're talking about how to integrate it with frameworks like Scrum or Kanban or other ways of working, is to not fall in the pitfall of building OKRs as a parallel universe. So what often happens is you have Scrum and then you also do OKRs. So you have your planning meetings and then you have your check-ins, you have your sprint goals, and then you have your OKRs, and they kind of live next to each other in your organization. I would say a lot smarter approach is to kind of obviously design the connections and really think about, okay, how do things integrate with each other? How do the connections look like? And how do we need to design them to add the most value and also decrease the effort of OKRs? Because that's a common feedback that many companies get, that it's just taken way too much effort. And we will look into that and why that happens in a minute. So what does designing the connections mean? Well, first of all, there's often a gap between the long-term goals and the OKRs. So many companies, for example, have a strategy stretching over 3 to 5 years, and now they try to define OKRs for the next 3 months. And then they stumble across this fact that, well, it's really hard to come from a 3-year perspective down to a quarterly, at least at the beginning. So something that can help is, first of all, to have a shared understanding of the long-term goals when you start off with OKRs. So I always use that as kind of, the initial setup and discussion in every OKR workshop to go through the vision, the strategic focus topics or roadmaps that are already out there to have a shared understanding of the foundation before going into the OKR definition. The other thing is you can add a midterm perspective. For some companies, that has proven to be helpful. So to think about a yearly perspective of OKRs, more like kind of a rough draft than outlined all the details, because we don't want to have another 12 months roadmap here, but just to think about, to give some orientation in terms of, okay, which direction are we moving forward when we kind of want to tackle our strategy long term? And how can we give some orientation also where we want to land in 12 months, for example? Importantly, though, it is that after every cycle, you think new about what is now the next important step to undertake and define OKRs for that. And that might even lead to you changing your yearly perspective due to new information or market changes or whatever happened. So it's nothing that is set in stone, but it's more something that can maybe help you and guide some orientation on your way towards describing OKRs on a 3-month cycle. So what can that look like? You can define yearly goals or yearly OKRs, for example, on company level, and use that as an orientation to then define quarterly OKRs on company, department, and team level. So I wouldn't say it's necessary to do that on all different levels, but more for a general orientation, for example, on company level. To maybe do a second example of this connection, the other important interface we're looking at is once you have your OKRs defined for the next 3 months, of course, you need to do things, you need to execute stuff in order to reach that goal. So how can you make sure that this connection is also integrated? Well, one option is to connect OKRs and initiatives that you're trying to achieve in some sort of, for example, portfolio Kanban board. So just to make sure that the things that you're executing in forms of initiative have a link towards the OKRs you're trying to achieve by, for example, stating which objective do we assume this initiative is supporting, or which other objective maybe is supporting a different from a different initiative. It can also be really detailed when it comes to, for example, epics or tickets. So that's an example from an e-commerce company. They used, for example, Jira categories to state which user stories they assume to have an impact on which OKR, just to get a little more transparency in terms of, are the things that we're executing actually connected to our OKR goals? Or does it maybe not even affect the OKRs? And then there will be a good reason for that. But just to get a little more transparency also in the teams, are we actually doing a lot of things that then tackle the OKRs? Or are we working on some other stuff and then maybe we need to find a different solution for that? So kind of bringing these two perspectives together, that's what I'm trying to point out here. So to have, for example, here in a Scrum board, your daily execution, but also the view of the 3 months goals at the same time to see, is there still a connection? Are there maybe some challenges here? Or how do these two things fit together as good as possible? And the same is true for the OKR events. So whenever possible, try to accommodate check-ins in a planning meeting, for example, or use one of your retrospectives to then also talk about the OKR process. So just to make sure that OKRs are not a huge additional bureaucracy effort, but rather something that kind of neatly fits into your existing concepts. And that, of course, will be very different for a Scrum team than a traditional HR team. So you could, of course, ask now, so why should we actually do all this hassle just for a new tool? Why can we not just, take the simple idea, roll it out, and be done with it? And I would like to argue that seeing OKRs just as a new tool that you roll out over teams might actually lead to further challenges. So taking the simple idea of describing objectives and key results to bridge your long-term goals to your execution might sound easiest first. And if you do that for your team level, it can stay that easy. But once you look at it from an organizational level and want to align your organization around shared goals, it gets a lot more complex if you actually want to have aligned OKRs throughout your organization. The same is true, of course, when we look at it from the organizational system point of view. So you're using OKRs to bridge the gap between the long-term goals and the execution. But of course, that's not the only thing that is happening in an organization. But it's also just as important how you lead your people, how people take over responsibility, or what values and norms drive your collaboration. Also, what structures and processes you have in place that might also be a foundation on how you divide OKR sets, how you collaborate, which tools you use. What about compensation and benefits? One of you just pointed out that they're coming from a rather traditional performance management system. As long as that is in place, and even worse, as long as that is connected to OKRs, you will definitely feel the effects, and OKRs might not be able to bring you that much value. The same as with how you implement learning and development. So kind of looking at OKRs from this organizational, this more systemic point of view, you will see that the way you currently work together, the way that your organization is currently set up, will have a huge impact on the value that OKRs can bring and the way you will also set up OKRs. The good thing is the same is true in reverse. So starting to work with OKRs will definitely bring up some challenges and topics that you might be able to tackle in the surrounding areas in order to develop your organization. So thinking of OKRs more as an essential part of the organizational system, because it kind of sums up everything that you're trying to achieve as an organization in your objectives and key result, is probably the more realistic perspective than just looking at it as a tool. And this way, OKRs can also serve as a catalyst. What do I mean with that? As I pointed out before, once you start working with OKRs, you might feel the effect in the reflections that it doesn't work right, or it takes way too much time, or people have challenges, for example, finding the right OKRs. That might be true, and at the same time, it might tell you a lot about, if you look at the underlying issues, what else you need to tackle in your organization in order to actually be able to achieve more, for example, focus or value creation. So seeing the whole picture is essential for OKRs to bring you the value that you want to see as well. And reflecting beyond the OKR process. So things in the process might not work out, but looking at the reasons behind. So is it really that we have a process problem here? Or is it maybe that the communication between the departments takes way too long time because we still have silos in place? Or is it something else? So let's look at this example then to make it a little more concrete. If people state it takes way too much time and they have already looked into the OKR process, what else could it relate to? So they, for example, told you that it's integrated with your business projects, that people have enough knowledge and experience around OKR, then we can maybe go to the wider circle and look at underlying issues. It could be that the silo thinking in your department leads to a huge effort in terms of alignment and aligned OKRs. Could also be that the communication between teams is not ideal, and communicating around shared OKRs, for example, when you have shared responsibility, is an issue. Could also be, at least that was the case for one of my customers, that people are having a hard time now taking this responsibility to actually finding the right approach because the OKRs do not tell them anymore what to do. It doesn't mean that people are not able to do that. It just maybe means that they are not used to doing that because the organizational system so far wanted something else from them. And so looking at these underlying issues and then tackling them might also lead to more added value when it comes to OKRs. So taking that, for example, something I really like to work with is the responsibility process. If you haven't come across it, yes, that's maybe one recommendation to take away from today. So describing the process that normally happens when things go wrong. And we all have just, a psychologically normal way to react to that. We start with maybe denying it, laying blame on others, justifying it for different causes, and might move into actually laying blame on ourselves, or just quitting and just giving up to avoid the pain entirely, or moving in a state of obligation to just, do what we should have to do instead of what we actually want to do and change something. And so, for example, the responsibility process can be a concept to, kind of teach people some more knowledge about these normal reactions and what then to do to get into a state of responsibility and actually tackling the underlying challenges and issues sooner. And if you, for example, use these kind of tools in your company and have that as a common denominator, it might also help you in your OKR implementation. So going back to that picture, what I wanted to state here is really to not look at OKRs as a single tool or as a parallel universe, but as central part of your organization with all its connections, for good or for worse, to all the organizational elements. And that's also, if you're interested to look at it from a case study point of view, what we're trying to focus on in the book. So to look at different organizations and their setup and their challenges and how then OKRs can help them to tackle these in the long run, but what also else needs to change in order to be able to get this value add out of OKRs. And if you want to learn more about that, I also run a monthly meetup where I always invite guests to share their stories and their experiences, because as I said at the beginning, that's something where I learn something new also every time I listen to people's stories. So feel free to join us there. We'll share it also in the mural board afterwards. So closing off before we go into the Q&A, coming back to this very simple idea. And I would still think OKR and its idea is rather simple. Implementing and mastering it is not that simple. But I think once you move away from looking at OKRs as just the simple cure for all your challenges and your problems, and kind of moving more into the direction of seeing OKRs as part of your organizational system, coming from the problem that you're trying to solve, and then making it fit to your organization, supporting the change journey, and getting into really designing and connecting OKRs to your existing work routines, then it might actually work as a catalyst for ongoing development, and you might be able to achieve the things that you're trying to achieve with it in the first place, whether it be focus, alignment, autonomy, learning cycles, meaningful contribution, or more value creation and outcome for your customers. So far, so good. I know there was a lot of input, and before we go into the Q&A section, I would love to invite you into your little breakout groups again, just to round up the discussion with what did you just take away from the discussion, and which question would you like to discuss with me and with your fellow participants here in the Q&A section afterwards.
Now people are starting grabbing in. Welcome back.
So welcome back, everyone. We got a couple minutes to kind of formulate your takeaways and then also your questions now when we open the floor for a Q&A session for the remaining 20 minutes of this session. So where would we like to start? Maybe some points of discussion, some takeaways before we go into the Q&As? Who would like to start from their group?
I can say something, and that is what I'm struggling with, and I've discussed in 2 groups now, is how to connect all the OKRs and how to aggregate it to, in my company, we have a strategic themes that the OKR should be connected to. How do we connect it and aggregate results?
So connecting in terms of connecting it through the different layers in your organization. Yes. Yeah. Maybe two thoughts on that. First of all, I don't believe in having OKRs on every single layer in every single department of your company necessarily, because it might not bring additional value to all of them. That said, I think what comes in place is kind of an alignment process. And so what works for some companies is to really define the company OKRs, maybe based on these strategic focus topics you were talking about, kind of communicate them in the first draft, and then let the departments or teams underneath formulate their contribution. Of course, if you have certain more layers in your organizations, that might not be an easy undertaking. Something that one of my customers tried successfully was to really have the departments then formulate their contribution to just give some direction, and then have all the teams underneath do the same, and then kind of have a workshop all together with representatives from the teams and the departments and the management team in a group of like 30, 40 people to then discuss all these drafts of OKRs and see if they actually align to a bigger picture. But it was a lot of preparation necessary before they then came together in the workshop. So beforehand, they did that just in your individual communication and alignment processes. And at least for them, it turned out to be better to just bring all the necessary people in one room and look at the big picture together and then solve some of the challenges right on the spot. I don't know if that helps in terms of your question, or did it also go in a different direction?
Both. Thank you.
So what other questions do we have? I see 2 already on the board. So one here that we can maybe tackle first. What's the functional difference between OKRs and Hoshin Kanri, perhaps other than a different cadence? When it comes to these different goal frameworks, I would say there are certain differences in theory, and then there are a lot more differences when it comes to the practical application. because I think the same is true for OKRs as it is for Hoshin Kanri, but also traditional goal management. The way that companies apply that is really on a big scale. So yes, I would agree that often Hoshin Kanri is used for a longer time frame. At the same time, it is often used, at least that's what a lot of people argue. I haven't seen that in practice, to be honest, that it's more on from a cascading point of view, trying to break down goals from the higher levels down to the team levels, whereas many companies, at least with OKRs, are trying to combine a top-down, bottom-up approach, more focusing on the outcome of something they cannot, how to put that, grasp at the beginning. So it's a more like kind of outcome open goal approach. At the same time, I haven't really experienced Hoshin Kanri in an organization to really get into the details of where I would see that. I would say the difference might also be what here again is the problem that you're trying to tackle, because they have a lot of similarities when it comes to what is the contribution of the teams. It might be a difference in terms of how you work with the goals than in your ways of working and how you then tackle that problem. But given that I have never worked in an organization actually using Hoshin Kanri, so it's only, theoretical reflection that I can give here. So I think it would be best to talk to people who have seen and lived that in practice, and then kind of put your OKR experience next to it and see what is the practical difference. Does anyone in the audience have more extensive experience with Hoshin Kanri than I do and can help out in that? Unfortunately not, so we're still in search of Hoshin Kanri experts here then. Good. Other question I see here, is there any difference in using OKRs in an organization or for value streams? Let me see if I get the question right. So is the question if there's a difference between using OKRs for a hierarchical organization, meaning you do company OKRs, department OKRs, team OKRs, compared to if you do OKRs for certain value streams? Is that the question?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say there's a huge difference in doing that. First of all, if you base OKRs on your hierarchical structure, the pitfall you often fall into in your organization is to build OKRs for the silos that you already have. So meaning that nothing really changes in terms of looking at the value creation or the bigger value creation in forms of your product or for your users, but kind of defining OKRs for marketing and for sales or for HR, and then somehow trying to link them at the top. What many companies experience over time is that doing OKRs for these silos are just kind of reestablishing this form of structure that they want to move away from when it comes to more cross-functional agile ways of working. So kind of looking at value streams as a basis for OKR definition will definitely move you further into the direction of focusing on the outcome of something and focusing on shared goals that actually have something to do with the outcome rather than defining more artificial goals for certain departments. I don't know if that already tackled the question, or is there anything further you would like to ask, Gunnar?
No, actually, I was hoping for just that answer. So thank you.
Phew. Thanks a lot. I have a third question here. If you have defined OKRs on company level and have teams aligning their OKRs, do you define initiatives on both levels and any risks when the companies or the company OKRs includes teamwork? I think two different aspects in here. Defining initiatives on both levels. Well, the thing to consider here, I would say, is defining initiatives on a company level might be useful for huge initiatives that kind of serve a purpose that many teams can contribute to if you already know about them. If we talk about, coming from a value stream point of view and an outcome point of view, I find it harder and harder actually to think about initiatives that are just given by the company management team to the organization because they know best what the next initiatives need to be. So I would love to argue for rather trying to stay away from defining initiatives on a company level unless it's really something that kind of serves, for example, all your product teams, because you have already done massive market research and the discovery and everything else. And now this initiative is one of the most important things to go about. But I would rather start more on a team, or if you then have department level, to talk about initiatives based on, okay, what is now our contribution to the OKRs and what do we now think is the next important step, rather than trying to define that from a company point of view. And given the second part of your question, any risk when company include teamwork? Do you mean when they kind of include features to be delivered or already initiatives, or what is the background of the question here? Maybe you can help me out, whoever wrote that post-it.
Maybe
Yeah,
that person isn't still here. Oh yeah.
Yeah, it was me, Ingalill here.
Sorry.
No, it's more it's a risk when you actually, if you have a department level and they have defined an OKR and initiatives, and then you have teams aligning to that OKR and defining their initiatives, is there a risk that they actually, the department level initiatives includes teams doing work, and then the teams as well have initiatives that actually they should do some that. Do you understand that kind of question?
Yeah, I think I know what you're getting into. And I think you're just pointing out one of the risks that I always see when you kind of take in the hierarchical structure as a basis for your OKRs, because then you will have exactly that, right? On company level, you think about what is the next important initiatives. You do the same on department and the same on team level. So looking for kind of an organizational structure where you would say when the team think about initiative based on they are set up for tackling an actual problem or a challenge or a value stream, wouldn't lead to that challenge. Given you still have that in your organization, I think for department, the same is true as for company level. I would try to stay away from defining initiatives on that level as much as possible, or at least bringing the ideas for initiatives then into, for example, the alignment workshop or some kind of collaborative format I pointed out before, to really see, okay, is that matching towards what the teams are trying to do? Is that aligned? Or are we maybe here defining things that the teams don't even know yet what the best approach might be? So as much as possible, leave it open to the teams to then, trying to find the best approach in terms of their initiatives, rather than kind of coming together on a department head level and thinking about, oh, we definitely need to go this way. And then you already have the direction given for your teams, and you kind of, lose out on the possible autonomy you give to your teams to find the best solution. All right. And we have another one here. How do you handle teams whose OKRs are dependent on the work of other teams? Any rules of thumb? That's actually coming back to this risk we're already talking about, using OKRs from your hierarchical structure. You will kind of bump into that in kind of almost every OKR, because you have a lot of dependencies when it comes to tackling challenges or creating new products. So one thing I like to try out with teams is to start using shared OKRs. So not just defining, for example, OKRs for sales or for marketing, but if you find that you have a common challenge and a common objective you want to tackle, to come up with a shared OKR where, for example, 2 people from marketing and 2 from sales, or 1 for each, are responsible to commonly achieve this OKR together, and then come up with a way of working underneath that actually kind of references that. So kind of to find ways to make the shared responsibility and also the shared challenge obvious already in the OKR process. And once you hit that again and again, it might also be good, now we're coming back to the underlying issues, to look at the structures of your teams, and it might maybe be worth looking into more cross-functional or value stream-driven teams to kind of also avoid that pitfall in the OKR setup. So let's see, what are the new post-its here? Is it normal that OKRs cascade and higher level KRs become lower level objectives? Oh, I love that question. Well, Well, I guess it depends on who you ask, because many people in the OKR field, many people who work with companies state exactly that. They use the key results and make them become objectives of the lower level. If you ask me personally, I don't believe that's a good idea for two reasons. First of all, OKRs for me have an added value by distinguishing between the inspiring objective and the measurement criteria that is very concrete in defining whether you are on the right track or not. If you now use a very concrete key result and kind of hand it over to the team as a possibly inspiring objective, I don't know what good could come out of that. And secondly, with that, you also don't really give the team the opportunity to think about their contribution and their most important objectives in order to be able to contribute to the larger goals. So you narrow down the possibilities of finding inspiring goals and finding a contributional fit for the teams quite a bit. So I'm not a big fan, to be honest. Right. What else do we have here? The last couple minutes. How and where can I learn more about the evaluation process? For example, rating how well you have performed on your way towards the objectives. I guess there are different ways to go about that. So if you're looking at, for example, check-in good practices, if that's what you're getting at, and please let me know if you don't. There are a lot of articles out there around, how to grade OKRs, how to measure key results, what to focus on in the check-ins. The kind of coming back to rule of thumb that I use here is really what brings the most value in a really short amount of time. So what can we measure in terms of measurement criteria? And for example, I like to add a confidence level. So to look at the actual number, where did we get so far? And then combine it with the perspective of how confident are we in this team that we will actually achieve this key result by the end of the cycle. And this together will give you a pretty good picture of where you stand right now and if you maybe need to change something or do something differently over the next couple of weeks in order to be able to achieve that goal. But was it that you were getting at with the rating question, or was it something additionally?
Yeah. Thank you.
And we've got one more. What should the relationship between OKRs and epics or initiatives be? Also a really good question. I've seen lots of variations out there that work for different organizations. One is that they have a couple epics defined that then contribute to their objectives, and they already point that out. Same goes for initiatives. So kind of coming back to this idea of this portfolio Kanban, or like to see, okay, this is my objective or my 2 or 3 objective. What are the most important then epics or initiatives I need to undertake? But I think it also depends on what you define as, for example, an initiative in your company. Is it something that a team can autonomously actually do in order to achieve an objective? Or is an initiative something on like a department or even company level size project? Then it might have a different connection. No matter how, I think the importance is to actually have some sort of obvious connection that you also define with your teams. One thing I can point out here is a colleague of mine, Tim Herbig. If you haven't come across him, that's maybe also a recommendation. He's doing a lot of work in terms of how to combine OKRs and product teams and in Scrum teams. So I guess his newsletters and content is something that you want to check out if you want to deep dive into that as well. All right, I think these were all questions on the board. Anything else that came up for you before we close that session?
Yeah, one question here. Mm-hmm. I was wondering, could you come up with a rule of thumb in terms of the amount of OKRs? I've heard the number 3 to 5, and I guess it's very contextual, but just a rule of thumb. And I come from a multi-brand company, and we really struggle with that normally. Well, every brand has 3 to 5, and then when you see them from the leadership, it looks like 25 focus areas for the coming quarter. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say my rule of thumb is more 1 to 3 than 3 to 5, but just because many companies are trying to really achieve more focus and alignment and also prioritization with OKRs. And I think if you already start with the rule of thumb of 3 to 5, and then you maybe make 6 or 7 out of it, it's not really getting more focus into your company. So really kind of trying already on a company level to narrow it down to the most important thing, because that will then help you to also give the focus down to your teams. If you already start with, for example, 5 or 6 on a company level and think it in terms of the OKR tree, that will be a lot of objectives and initiatives and all that on a team level as well. Having said that, and thank you for pointing out, it's just a rule of thumb. Of course, if you, for example, define OKRs for your 4 most important strategic areas, and they happen to be 4, of course, you shouldn't just skip one in order to just have 3 OKR sets, but be as reasonably focused, I would say, as possible, because that might really help you and your employees in order to achieve focus and alignment with them. All right. I guess that already brings us to the end of the session. So I would love to just thank all of you for participation, for your questions, for actively discussing OKRs. I'm so happy to be part of this Agile Reflect Festival. And as stated also in the mural board, you'll find the links to the meetups if you want to meet a couple more fellow participants. We'll have the next one going on every first Tuesday of the month, talking about especially that focus and just picking actually one OKR and how that worked for a startup. And in April, we will talk about how to combine OKRs and pay and the challenges that has. So thanks again. And if you want to do a quick checkout, then just share one insight or one inspiration you took away from this event in the Zoom chat. I would love to see the value that I could bring to you. And after that, have a very happy evening and enjoy everything else that is offered around the Agile Reflect. And thank you a lot, Patrick, for hosting, and back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Natalija, for having this awesome session for us. Really great. And thank you, everyone, joining. And you will all get a recording of this session when it's done. And you can see more at agile20reflect.org. And you can also sign up for more of our events at dandypeople.com. Next week, Natalija will be back together with 2 of my colleagues. So yeah, just go in and enjoy all the free events that are still up on the Agile Reflect homepage. It spans through all of February.
Sorry, can you repeat the name of your meetup? Because I'm looking at the checkout, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, sure. It's called OKRs at the Center Meetup, but we will also share the link to the mural board, so you'll be able to just click on that.
Okay.
Let me just put that in the chat for you as well.
Yes,
that's, I guess, the easiest way.
It was amazing session. Thank you so much. It was very, very, very good one.
Well, thanks a lot for that feedback. Glad you enjoyed that.
Absolutely.
So here is the link as well. That's the English one. We've got a German one in case some of you are capable to speak in that language as well.
English will be good for me.
So happy to see you in one of the next sessions then.
Thank you so much. Brilliant.
And take care, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay happy, most of all.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Nice to see you. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Evening or day. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.